solar's the gateway drug. People love solar. They get it. They understand it. They want it. And the rest comes later when they become informed, prosumers or whatever. They become generators. Then they know how many kilowatt hours they're using. And then they're starting to look at, well, what else can I do? And add my EV. I can still afford it, And so I think people need to understand that you got to start with solar. That's just, I'm not saying it's rational. Like, it's not how an engineer would do it. It's how people do it. It's how people think. When we went solar, my husband, my teenage kids started turning off the lights after we got solar. Why? They're like, I don't want to waste my energy. People are not rational. People are connected to real things. And solar has a really important role for that.
In 2007, two young boys in a downtown DC neighborhood saw a video that many saw that changed the perspective of what's happening in our world, An Inconvenient Truth. And it so permeated their psyche and the way they began to see the neighborhood and the homes around them that they walked door to door asking their neighbors would they like to join them in a fight against climate and an attempt to change the world around them. That begat some 50 homes that gathered to talk about solar for their community and their neighborhood. And some 17 years later, and 10,000 residential solar projects, Solar United Neighbors has been the driving force in community solar development, the true community solar development that is empowering communities to purchase solar together. Not often a faraway, aggregated central solar plant, but in distributed solar on each home's rooftops. Today we'll meet with Anya Schoolman, the mother of one of those young men and one of the co-founders and executive director of Solar United Neighbors. If you're new here, welcome in. This is SunCast. We tell the stories behind the businesses changing our energy infrastructure. We're on the front lines of the clean energy transition. My name is Nico Johnson, your host, and I'm proud to be once again in the headquarters of a company that is and has changed the way people go solar. If you like these kinds of conversations, you're in the right place. I hope that you'll subscribe, because twice a week we bring conversations just like this to your doorstep, to your earbuds. And I hope that you will continue to tune in. For now, let's get ready to tune up your skills, Solar Warrior, as we tune into another powerful conversation here on SunCast. Well, Anya, the power of youthful exuberance can't be overstated. Solar United Neighbors began as a humble sort of preteen project. Could you tell me a little bit about Walter and Diego and the vision they had and how this movement came to be?
From the very beginning, their idea was we need to do something ourselves, not wait for someone else to do it. Yeah. And you mentioned in the opening how they went door to door. And I just have to say that if they weren't 12-year-old boys, we would have failed right there, because our house is row houses, and every front door is 2 flights of steps up to the front door. Oh, yeah. So I went with them on the first 2, and then after that, I stayed down on the sidewalk, and they ran up and down the stairs. So there's some things that just only kids can really do. Yeah. So, but I think for my son, Walter, one of the big takeaways, when he looked back on it, was that you don't have to know what you're doing before you start.
Right.
And that was like a really big aha moment for him. And then for me too, when I heard him say that. So it's just this idea that start moving, ask for help, see what happens.
So Walter and his friend Diego, schoolmates, saw An Inconvenient Truth, and they were left with this lingering question. What can we do? My recollection is that they mulled over several ideas. How did they land on solar?
I actually have no idea how they actually, while we were figuring out the solar, because this is 2007, they did another project that was about bulk purchase of compact fluorescent light bulbs. That was when they were just first coming out before the LEDs took over the market. And so they were trying different things, but they really wanted the idea was like, well, in our neighborhood. So what's physically different?
Was there something that you all encountered that drove them to this idea that they needed to be involved in the purchasing process?
Well, I mean, really what happened was first they just wanted to take their own house as solar.
Right. Just go solar on home.
And so this is again, 2007, the market's not developed. We got a list of all the installers that were listed from the Department of Energy to DC Department of Energy, called them all, like the three of us, and none of them were willing to come into DC because we were kind of downtown. So there was some solar out in the suburbs, but not in DC. And they were like, the market, you can't, there's no interconnection. There's no way to sign up and forget it. And so that was then the idea went to group. Because with a group, you could either attract a company to get interested. We actually had 89 houses to start. And it ended up 45 went solar. But we had 89 homes in the group.
In that first meeting?
In that not first meeting, but when we ended up like going out to the industry and saying, we have 89 houses, who would be willing to help out? But we had to address all kinds of things. It took us 2 years for the first group. So there was no residential interconnection agreement at the Public Utility Commission. And so we had to get that done. There was no SREC market. The utility at the time, which was Pepco at the time, was just paying their compliance fees and not buying SRECs. So there was a whole lot of pieces that we put into place with a lot of help from industry and other people to actually build the fundamentals of the DC market.
The kernel of the idea was instead of each home going one by one, soliciting quotes and putting solar on, was the Groupon of solar, basically. How do we, and this is pre-Groupon, mind you, but this idea that you could collectively both have purchasing power and entice, therefore, these installers to come into downtown proper.
So the original idea was that. It's like maybe we could make it affordable because, of course, solar was, I don't know, $8 a watt back then or something like that. So the group discount was the first idea. But almost immediately after that was the power of coming together. When we realized we needed to deal with I took the fire department to visit their first solar facility. I took the electrical inspector from DC to visit their first solar facility. So we had having a group of homeowners in a neighborhood. Not only did we have more impact on DC government and on the utility and getting their attention, but then we had one of the most powerful DC council members on our side who was head of appropriations. So there was sort of a lining up of the power building side almost immediately as the discounting side.
One of the most interesting pieces of the story that you recounted to me when we first met was about Diego. And because I asked, was there any embedded sort of lobbying party or experience? And your answer was, well, Diego became our chief lobbyist as a teenager.
He's an amazing kid. He's an amazing man now. He's just turned 30, I think. But he was in the debate team in school, and he was a very talented orator. And not only did he present all of our lobbying at the DC Council, either in person or at council hearings, but he wrote it all. And I rarely even had to change what he wrote. And as I mentioned, our council member was quite a powerful figure. And so he got to know Diego personally. And when they were holding a public hearing for something, if he saw Diego walk in the room, he'd say, wait, we have to rearrange the testimony so Diego can go first. Because he's in high school, I know he has to get back to class.
That's amazing.
And so Diego would go and give this speech, get a standing ovation, and then we were like, we're done. We did it.
So 2007, there wasn't an SREC market. You all got involved in lobbying legislation to create an SREC market, or solar renewable energy credits, for those who are unfamiliar. What needed to change in order for the business of which, Mount Pleasant Solar Cooperative, as it was known in those days, wasn't in a business at all at that time. But what needed to change in order for Solar United Neighbors, as it became known, to evolve, to become true, for this dream to become a reality?
In the beginning, we also had a grant for solar.
You got a grant?
Yeah, we got the city to pass.
Okay.
They'd actually been collecting funding.
Okay.
So there's like little fee on everybody's electric bill that's been there for many years, and it was mostly going. It's actually a really long story. The money was supposed to go to energy efficiency or clean energy. I would
imagine, yeah.
And the utility was they were just using the money for like a greenwashing campaign with no impact. So part of what happened when we got politically active is the DC councils took that money away from the utility and then started spending it for promoting programs like solar and energy efficiency. So it was a big shift. And it was partially because suddenly the public was paying attention. We were asking, well, where is the Renewable Energy Development Fund? That's what it's called.
Yeah.
REDF, right? Where's the money? You're collecting it from us. So that was something. Then the Public Utility Commission in DC, it's weird because it's just like a state commission, but it's only for DC. And so there was no way for a residential, there was a registration form for solar, when you register your system so you can be on GATS and get SRECs.
Right.
But the registration form was one for like utility scale.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have like a resi form. We met with the Public Utility Commission. I had a pro bono lawyer at the time who was very familiar with the DC workings. He just heard about us and volunteered from a major sort of public interest utility lawyer. And so we met with one of the commissioners. He's like, you're absolutely right. We should have that form. But I'm afraid to tell you, you're probably going to have to sue us to get us to do it. Wow. Because we're so backlogged, right? So there's just,
in order to make it a priority.
Yeah. And then the DC permitting, they had no idea how to permit solar.
So did you sue the city?
We didn't have to sue them. There was behind the scenes collaboration that took place.
Got it.
Yeah. But again, it was the idea that it wasn't Anya or an NGO, the Sierra Club or somebody. It was a large group of organized homeowners is what got people's attention. It's really, we had the same experience a couple years later in Blacksburg, Virginia.
Right.
We organized a group there and, very friendly, city government. They didn't have a solar permit. And they told us that they'd been working on it for like 2 or 3 years and they'd get around to it, in another 2 or 3 years or something like that. When we got to 100 homeowners in Blacksburg, they got it done in a month.
Wow.
Just
that's
done. They're like, mayor does not want to deal with 100 organized, mad
showing
residents.
up to council meetings.
Yeah. So we keep seeing that power of the group.
Differentiate for me the Solar United Neighbors and Community Power Network.
The whole thing was unintentional, right? So in the beginning, when we started in DC, we were these group purchases, which we called co-ops.
Yeah.
So, and it was by the name. So there was the Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op, and there was the Palisades Solar Co-op, and the Capitol Hill Solar Co-op, and the Ward 8 Solar Co-op, and the Ward 7. DC's got, political division by Ward 7 Co-op, Brookland Co-op. So we started moving them all around the city. And that group, Kate, we would come together once a year we called it a solar congress. We're DC, right? So we would get a big room, meet, figure out, what needs to happen next, and the sort of underlining principle was solar should be affordable and accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
Right? That's the bottom line. And so we would look at who isn't getting solar and who needs to, And at one of those meetings, Solar United Neighbors came along.
Okay.
And so that was like, we literally voted on it.
There was a charrette.
Everybody got to put up their ideas, and then everybody had dots, and you got to vote, put 3 dots for your favorite name, and Solar United Neighbors won. So that was cool. And then at the same time, when this is about 4 or 5 years in, we were sort of going from being all volunteer towards actually thinking of becoming a 501c3 nonprofit. Right. And we had to incorporate. Along came Discovery documentary. Yeah. And they were doing a really pretty great series on energy globally. Right. And they did, out of the multi-hour series, they did 15 minutes on the Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op. Wow. And so they, interviewed Walter and Diego, and they, went up and down the neighborhood and interviewed everybody. It was a lovely piece, but it aired globally. Yeah. And it especially aired over and over again, cable TV at night and stuff like that. So I started getting emails from all over the world, but mostly all over the U.S., from other groups like us.
Other neighborhoods, other communities.
And lots of different project models. They weren't all aggregate purchasing models like what we did. There was community solar projects, and there was, worker-owned cooperatives, everything. Yep. But it was all the same idea. We want solar or renewable energy. There was also some biofuel people and some small wind. And we got to know a lot of people across Canada and the U.S. with the similar idea. And so in the beginning, we created Community Power Network is what we incorporated. Right. And the idea was literally like my spreadsheet got too complicated because, 2 people would call me from Toronto, and I'm like, you guys should meet each other.
You were just a networker.
I was just networking them. And so that's what it was. We created a website to do it. But all the while that we were doing that Community Power Network thing, the industry's changing and growing, right? And internet's changing, and people are finding each other. And so what ended up being the most important part was the on-the-ground part, the Solar United Neighbors part. So it was kind of like we had a dual personality, and then Sun really took over. We started adding states. So then we had DC Sun, Maryland Sun, Virginia Sun. Yeah. And then over time, we're like, this is one organization. So it was an organic, not pre-planned process.
Do you remember the moment where it really became a job for you? It was no longer a group of volunteers. Like what was the catalyst?
Well, there was one moment. So Emily Stever was a volunteer, and I think I've called her co-founder a lot of times. She wasn't here in the beginning at the Mount Pleasant part, but she was here when we were doing co-ops all over DC and starting to add the state things. And she had been working as one of those Beltway Bandit consultant jobs, and she was unhappy in her job. And so she started volunteering 2 days a week. We were meeting in my kitchen. Wow. And she volunteered 2 days a week for a year. And at the end of the year, she's like, Anya, you got to start paying me. And so I was like, okay. I'd been sort of dreading becoming a 501c3 because then you have
there's a process.
Lobbying limits and taxes and incorporation and all that. So that's when we bit the bullet and started that process. So there was a very clear moment is when Emily said, now you have to start paying me. And then I had to make a decision. Because for a long time, I was really happy just having it be a volunteer thing for me, that I had a job as a consultant doing philanthropy around natural resource management. Yeah. And it was really nice to be able to just do it for love as opposed to being a job.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so when Emily asked for a job or for some sort of compensation, you needed to turn a corner. Up until then, it had been both volunteer fueled and everyone else had a job, sort of. Yeah. At that point, you decided 501c3, you'll become the executive director, or was there a group that decided you'd become the executive director?
We just did it. It was like Emily and I did it at that point,
And then did you still work as a as a consultant to help bring income?
For quite a few years, until I eventually dropped off.
What was the catalyst that allowed you to no longer need the additional consulting work that actually brought in enough funding for Solar United Neighbors? I'm curious about the business model and how sort of the coffers began to fill as an entity that could self-sustain.
It's an interesting question. I mean, so when you think about nonprofit business model, it's almost like Alice in Wonderland to a for-profit business model.
Right.
You know, in a for-profit, if you're not, you know, you're generally like either getting revenue and then investing revenue in growth, or you're projecting revenue and investing it in growth, right? And in the nonprofit, you get, somebody gives you money up front.
Right.
And it's much more about their market and that, you know, than yours, right? Okay. Because the thing that people don't understand about philanthropy is that they don't fund you for what you're doing. They fund you for how you fit into their strategies.
Okay.
Right? So in the early years, none of the funders understood what we were doing, but they could understand a slice. Yeah. So we started to get fairly significant money from some of the sort of green energy advocacy funders, where they could see how we're organizing all these homeowners to do big policy changes, change bills and, you know, change policies at the state and local level. And so there was a set of investors or funders that we cultivated doing that. And then we also started to get a lot of contracts from cities who wanted a program like what we were running. Sure. And so as we professionalized the program, which took many years, because as you know, we've just talked about, it was just volunteers in the beginning. Right. It is a very tightened up professional operation right now. Right. Everything's in Salesforce. We have a really rigorous RFP. We're, you know, legal documents, all that kind of thing. And once we sort of had that service as like, we can do a bulk purchase, or we call them co-ops, but you call it a solarized. It's a little different than a solarized, but we can do it in your city. So we started to get a lot of city contracts. That's one thing that when we grew into Florida, we actually started in Florida because someone was listening to a radio interview of me, and they had one of those driveway moments where they were like, we need to do that in Florida. Right. And we started in Florida. We were sort of coaching these volunteers to do what we used to do, like as a volunteer. And everybody told us we were crazy. They were like, there is no solar market in Florida. There's just like, it's dead.
What year is this?
I'm so bad at
Mid-teens.
years. It's, I don't know. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, okay.
10 years ago. So whatever that is.
So everyone said you're crazy to be in Florida.
They all said we're nuts. And they were like, there's never going to be a solar market. It's, you know, it's dominated. Florida Power and Light, et cetera. And what happened is we did a partnership with the League of Women Voters, who are super badass in Florida. And then they brought in the cities. Yeah. And so we had contracts. We've still had, you know, it's Sarasota, Tampa, Orlando, Miami, up in the Panhandle, all over, local government contracts to run these. And so we built a network that built an industry. I mean, from when we started, companies that used to be like two guys in a truck, you know, after hundreds of customers that we were educating, aggregating, screening, and turning over for a very low, we do charge money. So you got a business audience. We charge $600 per completed contract to the installer. Got it. But compared to like lead gen, where you might pay for thousands of names and get a couple, and we actually are really generous. We give the installers like 2 months after the completion of the contract, and it's fully paid to pay us. Yeah. And so it's just really working to grow them, right?
Yeah, that's as much as 1/5 of what they would cost, of what it would cost them to acquire that customer on their own.
Yeah, and it creates this dynamics where, because there's deadlines and groups of neighbors where a lot of people who'd been thinking about it, we make it really easy for them. Of course. And they've got this neutral coaching through the whole process. And what we've also seen in a few places where we've studied permitting in a jurisdiction is that there's a huge bump even the year after we're done.
Oh, cool.
Because everybody's getting their neighbor to do the same thing.
Got it. So the referral program, but you guys don't get any of that residual.
No, we don't even try because we're trying to be as fair as we can with.
And as a nonprofit, your job is to be a catalyst.
To be a catalyst, exactly.
Yeah. How cool. What I want a bit more clarity on is perhaps the difference, if there is any, but I remember seeing the Florida market start to take off with a program that I think is called Solarize. You mentioned it a minute ago. Is Solarize somehow different from Solar United Neighbors? What's the difference?
It's a little different. In most Solarize campaigns, the sponsor, like if it's a city or a state, manages the program themselves.
Yeah.
And they choose the installers themselves. And often they'll do like a step program, like the more people that sign up, the lower the price and stuff like that. We don't do any of that. So
is Solarize just their competitor to you guys?
They're a competitor, but it's sort of like it's a different thing for a different.
I was under the impression, perhaps because of the way that you just described, that it was a municipal program and that it was some sort of like, I don't even know, like government.
Solarize.
Yeah.
Yeah, it tends to be. The big difference, I think, of our groups is that the homeowners ultimately pick the installer.
Okay.
And that protects the cities because then there's no blowback if there's a problem or anything. And it gives us like a couple of months to really educate the homeowners. It's not just, we do the roof review right off, like good roof, bad roof, whatever, remote. But then the ones who volunteer to be on the selection committee, they're learning about the equipment, they're learning about net metering, they're learning about all kinds of things so they can evaluate the proposals.
So part of the organization is you organize the homeowners to have a selection committee.
Yeah. And first we'd run the RFP. So we issued RFP. We have a very large list. It's open to anybody. You tend to get a lot of companies. We do an analysis so that what the homeowners get is a spreadsheet where we boil down the proposals in sort of comparable categories like equipment, warranties, et cetera. And then we sit, and before COVID, it was always in person, for 2 or 3 hours at somebody's kitchen with a group of people going through the bids. We don't vote, they vote. It's nearly always unanimous. So it's like this really community building process. And then the other homeowners, they know that their neighbors, made the choice because it's really scary for homeowners to pick a solar company. It's usually what we see is without a process like that, homeowners, they might get a couple bids, they're interested, they're curious, and then they get 2 or 3 bids, they have no idea what the difference is, they're not comparable. There's like, this one is, 14 panels, and this is 17, and I don't know what the difference between any of the other things or what it means, and then they stop.
Yeah.
And so this is like this crank to get them over the paralysis. So it's really exciting. And then those people often become organizers of the next group or advocacy, people that show up at the Public Utility Commission hearing on, the SRECs or whatever, the net metering, whatever the thing is.
What do you think people get wrong about the model?
I think there's some installers that think it's a race to the bottom because there's a competitive bid. So we often hear complaints like either I didn't get chosen or, it's a race to the bottom, like your prices are too cheap. And what we're trying to do is make it more profitable for installers. So if the installer doesn't have to spend, I think the number that is thrown around these days is $3,000.
Yeah. Cost of acquisition.
If that's zero to you, then, and we're charging $600.
Yeah. Well, if it's $600, then
And then say the homeowner gets $600, there's still a bonus for the company.
Yeah.
Right. And we do lots of things in the process to make it really work for the companies.
Yeah.
But And the ones that have worked with us really usually will testify that it's a good process and a fair process.
Right.
But if a company's already spending the money on, customer acquisition, they're like, we don't need you to find us customers. We're already spent all that money. We already have a crew. So that's a disconnect. And so I think that's the thing that's most often. And then I think from the perspective of like our funders, I think they don't understand that this is actually a form of political organizing.
Yeah.
Right? Like we pick legislative districts at times. Like we need to be in this district. Let's do a co-op there. Right? So we can, like we did a lot of work in Florida, in the Florida Panhandle. Nobody's paid us to do that work, or very rarely have we got paid to do that work. And we're like, we need the Panhandle if we're going to have Florida. We know we have all the progressive cities. When we had this big net metering fight a couple of years ago, the people in the Panhandle were able to talk to DeSantis and get him to veto that bill.
Yeah.
Right? They were his people when he started hearing from there. So people don't see how political what we're doing is, some people, and then others in the industry, they're like, I understand it. Some of they think we're an intermediary that's just skimming and not providing value. I think we're actually really stimulating markets, and that there's a lot more. Like, I think we can't prove it. I don't have the time to figure out how to prove it. Maybe someone could prove it, but we've seen the permits just explode after we run one of these co-ops. We educate, 10 people for everyone that goes solar. And many of those people go solar
eventually,
later. Next year when when I'm doing my roof, for example.
That's a really interesting statistic as well. 10 to 1, the folks so 10%-ish of the folks that you aggregate end up saying, yes, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, something like that.
But that is a big impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that means that 10,000 homes have gone solar through your programs, 100,000
at least
more have been exposed to it. And arguably there's another 30, 40,000 that have gone solar that you aren't able to track because they weren't part of your program.
There's also all these studies that say the single largest indicator of whether someone will go solar is if they have a neighbor or know someone that went solar. So we think there's then this blossoming that follows, right? Because then everybody knows somebody that went solar in Orlando or whatever where it is. Yeah.
And you're not an outlier.
Yeah. So we do love to go in. That's another disconnection. Like we're in a lot of bad solar market states. And a lot of people are like, well, why aren't you in the big solar market states? Like we're actually just opening a Nevada program, but we've never been there before.
Yeah.
Like, we're kind of like, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Nevada, they don't need us, right? So.
Do you have direct deals then with OEMs? Are you getting?
No, that's all. We've thought about it multiple times, but in the end, we let the installer bring, whoever wins, they bring in their relationship. We're not trying to get in the middle of their business model.
Because there are other nonprofits for sure that get large donations, so to speak,
exactly,
that they can apply.
We don't do any of that. So we're really trying to stimulate the market, not compete in any way. It makes sense.
You pull it through. Yeah. In fact, you empower those installers to have a better bargaining
distributors
position.
I can do that for you. Yeah, right. Yeah. So they work out deals with their distributors. And we're like, why do we want to become a solar distributor? That's a different, that's not what our business model is.
Yeah.
People are like, but you might squeeze an extra, dime off a kilowatt or whatever.
You mentioned working in some of the harder states. How do you decide where to focus your attention?
It's a really hard decision. It's been, and I think people get mad at me for being so vague about this, like I don't know, like that we should have a grand vision, but usually it's because people ask us to come. When we started our Ohio program, we were already in West Virginia and we were doing a co-op in Wheeling, and people came across the Ohio River Bridge.
Yeah.
joined our meeting and said, come over the bridge to Ohio. That was literally why we went to Ohio. It's also because we're so philanthropy dependent, if we can identify a funder or a big partner. So
do you focus, I know that a big focus is on diversity going into communities where you can help get solar into more diverse homes and being more inclusive. How much does that drive the sort of the rural versus urban discussion?
Yeah, we're like on both sides of that, and very dedicated to staying on. We're really dedicated to rural and conservative communities. Like our Pennsylvania program is just Western PA. We don't even go near Philly. We're like, they don't need us in Philly. Philly has a program. So we have two really big new lines of work that sort of follow those new tracks. One is working on the USDA REAP program. And so we do technical assistance on that. We do outreach, facilitate, help people fill out the forms. And then we do a big storytelling program around it, profiling, people go solar, earn media, spreading the word. So it's a really big new line of work that we're really into.
How do you do the media piece, the storytelling piece? What does that look like?
Like dedicated staff, finding people that got the grants, either because we helped them, or else they went on their own. It could be anywhere in the USA. So they find people who got the grants, interview them, and then if it's a really great story, we send out a camera crew, do an interview, and then we pitch to journalists. So we just did this one on a die-cast factory, and I think it was Michigan. I can't even remember. Really lovely piece, 5 minutes. We've got 200 earned media stories already around this one piece. And they'll link, it'll be in the local news. It'll be, and we're really aiming, we don't care if the New York Times publishes it. Like, our funders will, but we want it to be, what do people in rural America read, right? So the local news and the little local papers and all that. And then the energy equity, solar from low income households. So we've been working on it for many, many years. The first piece was community solar in DC. And we helped, first we did this big coalition with low income housing community in DC to get our DC community solar program similar in Maryland. Different program. The Maryland one has a low income carve out. So that's a whole line of work doing community solar, because so many people who are low income are in apartment buildings or renters, so they can't participate in solar on their own. So that's one line. And then in DC, we managed to get Solar for All passed, which is a precursor to this federal, which is a $20 million a year program with a legislated goal of lowering the bill of every low-income household in DC by 50% by using local solar. And the DC whole market is structured to build the jobs in DC, right? Like, it would be cheaper to buy SRECs from elsewhere or whatever. We have the most expensive SRECs, and it's because of the commitment of building the whole ecosystem locally. We were the first group to run the single family program in DC, and we wrote this big, 50-page lessons learned document. Like, it's hard. And my fundamental message to all the people that are going to be spending the $7 billion for the Solar for All program from the Greenhouse Gas Initiative Fund is, it's much harder than you think. It's much harder than market rate solar, which is already hard. Ask any installer. It's really hard to stay in business doing it. But we started 2018 in DC and then spread across the country and developed more than 23 different city-focused, almost all city, there's 2 rural ones, low-income solar programs. They were all pilots, small, 10, 5, 3, small number of houses, every single one of them had a different capital stack and a different model.
Yeah.
And we were like, let's just learn. So for 2018, 19, right up to the present, we've been running these pilot projects in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Duluth, Minneapolis, Phoenix, Tucson, Houston, Florida. I don't think we haven't done any Florida, and Appalachia, and the sort of Virginia, Appalachia.
Yep.
So we've developed sort of a body of work on that side as well.
Right.
And now we're looking into the Solar for All program, which we worked with a lot of our partners to write applications, and then we're trying to figure out what's next, I guess.
You mentioned Solar for All, and I know that a lot of folks probably weren't as familiar with the concept of Solar for All. I'd love to, if you could unpack a little bit, what does Solar for All mean in its kind of traditional sense? And then what does it mean now under this government program that you have just alluded to?
I think what it means fundamentally is sort of what the Mount Pleasant Co-op started on, which is solar should be accessible and affordable for all. So accessible means you have to have a place, some way to get it, right? Yeah. So if you don't own a roof, then community solar is the best model we've got out there. But it has to be a community solar program that, is open, that there's enough subscriptions that people can get to, that's affordable. And then affordable, if you're working with and you're trying to address energy burden, energy equity, you're subsidizing this.
Yeah.
There isn't a straight up business model that addresses equity, affordability for the most low income people.
Yep.
We know that solar pencils out for pretty much anybody anywhere in the United States, but you have to be able to, weather, sometimes an 11-year payback.
Yeah.
It's still net positive for a 20-year, 25-year investment. It's a great investment anywhere, but if you're low income, you're cash flow sensitive, very sensitive. Right. And so that's the key. And I think that addressing energy burden is the centerpiece of the federal program.
Okay.
And that's also like the jury's out. Like, are they going to do that?
Yeah.
Most people come at this with, the problem is credit, access to credit, right? And all we have to do is, do some credit backing and reinforcement and loan loss reserve, and we can build a low-income program. The problem is that if the payment for solar monthly is higher than the savings monthly, not net year, but every single month, including January.
Yeah,
in Duluth,
the lowest peak, the lowest production. Yeah,
it has to be cash flow positive, or you're going to, potentially force a family to choose not to eat or have to pick.
Right. So the energy reduction and the savings therein has to be greater than the corollary cost of the solar that reduced their utility bill.
Exactly.
Essentially, I was paying $100 before, and now my utility bill plus my solar loan is less than $100.
Has to be, or you're not addressing equity. Yeah. And whereas with a market rate customer, you're like, just as long as it pencils out over the life of the system, you're fine. Like, I can take a float of, a few extra dollars a month, or it's, it's fine, So
I actually want to just pull on that thread a minute, because it seems to me that a market-based approach to the low income would simply be finding the algorithm for netting at zero, not savings.
Yeah, but then you're not addressing equity, right? So the idea is that the theory of equity is that there's an aspect to it that's restorative. It's not just equal, right? That low-income communities have been subject to prejudice, the worst impacts from carbon, the power plants are there, and they're also the most stressed right now. If you're really stressed, the last thing you want to do is screw around and figure out how to get a solar system if it's just going to be either, right? It's got to make you better off.
Yeah, I appreciate the insight around the restorative piece of it, because from an economics perspective and as a capitalist, we were prone to look at it and say, but they're participating in solar. It is making it accessible. Thank you. Right. And it's affordable if, in fact, it is a like-for-like exchange. Right. And now they're participating in reducing climate change, reducing greenhouse gases. They have distributed energy. If you also extrapolate on that, then they are now providing a service to the utility and the community. Right. Right? That they're not getting compensated for if it's just a net.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that delta is not well defined. And I think that's where a lot of the hard and heavy work for implementing the Solar for All program will come. Yeah. And I think there'll be a range of interpretations of
that delta has been defined in Illinois, for example, with FIJA, right? And CEJA. In, I think, Michigan as well. How do you see the programs in the Midwest playing out in terms of helping to establish the relevant amount of savings that is considered equitable?
Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah. I think what's really difficult, I think, challenging, maybe it's an opportunity, is that each state is being pretty much left to their own. There's not strong guidance that I've seen so far coming from EPA as to how to define this. People have defined it independently in their proposals, like this is what our target is, but the proposals aren't public. So we haven't, even on the ones that we worked a lot on, many of them we've never even seen the final proposal. So like who the final crunching of the numbers, because everybody's kind of holding it close because they're in negotiations with EPA to get the green light to go. So I think post-September, this conversation will be based on like real proposals and, seeing what people are going for. But we have, because we were involved in 23 of the applications, we've seen a wide range of interpretations.
Do you anticipate that you will, through Solar United Neighbors, you will participate in a fair share of those Solar for All programs?
We know we're going to be running the Florida program fundamentally.
Oh, cool.
So we won that with a small consortium of nonprofits because the state government didn't apply. Okay. So we're building a program there based on our understanding of those terms. In the other one, it's all different. Like there's so many variations, right? So
is this 50-page document that you have written the lessons learned and developed the tools and support kit? Is that something that A, you've already shared with the winners, or B, is available publicly for folks to be able to access?
Absolutely. Everything's on our website, Solar United Neighbors, .org. We share everything. We share our RFP. We share our contracts. We're a nonprofit. So our idea, our role and job is to stimulate and help other people grow, whether it's a company or other nonprofits. We've been writing lessons learned from each of our pilot projects. Like I said, we did 23 low-income pilots. And they were, a lot of them different. But I guess one of the fundamentals, I would say, in this answer about benefit, in the DC program that we were running in 2018, 2019, we had $2 million to give away free solar, 100% free.
Wow.
No loan required, no financing. Great impact on your electric bill. And it was very, very hard. We had to give some of the money back to the government because it takes so long to build trust in a low-income community where they've been screwed and ripped off.
Yeah. That should have been less than 100 systems.
Yeah. We ended up doing 78 or something.
Yeah. My number was like figuring probably around 80 systems, right? About 25,000 per system.
It was, And if we had kept going, we think we could have built a pipeline because then we would have had the first people that went talking to their neighbors again.
Yeah, the catalyst.
Right. But getting started, when you're looking at now 50 states are getting ready to start these programs, and none of them realize that Like when you walk into a community and say, you can have a free system, you get the door slammed in your face. So then if you add on, oh, well, we're going to have you finance it and there's going to be a lien on your home and da-da-da-da. There's some real challenges here. So, yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. It's a tough, but really kind of exciting and interesting area. We have some real depth in staff who have worked on these problems, but also evaluated them. And there's a group that's been working on the same set of issues with community solar from an NGO called Energy Allies. And that group is coming into Sun to build our capacity there.
Cool.
The other thing we're really working on hard related to Solar for All, which comes from our market rate work, is consumer protection work. We now run a national help desk. It's free. It's open to anybody in the country who wants to ask questions. We're installer neutral. We don't get any money from helping anyone. We now have a lot of data of problems that consumers are having.
Okay.
And one of the most common ones we see, so we're recommending a lot of things for consumer protection, but one of the most common things we see is that people don't understand the contract that they signed. Like, who reads the fine print, right? Like, I'm just not one of those people. Like, did you ever get a mortgage and you had to put a signature on 300 pages? You know?
I read all of them.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Not me. I was just like, okay, tell me, you know.
Yeah, I'm a weirdo like that.
But that's, you know,
I read the terms and conditions.
You're a rare person.
Yeah, I recognize that.
So one of the things that we're advocating for, and we've been circulating it with the big solar companies as well as small ones, and working through SIA, is a uniform cover sheet for all solar contracts, just like when you get a mortgage.
Yeah.
That everyone has the same uniform sheet.
How do you define distributed?
Basically roofed, you know, anything that's behind the meter.
Yeah.
So rooftop or ground mount behind the meter. And we include community solar in that. And obviously we include batteries, EVs.
But community can be,
it can be
20,
giant,
30, 50 megawatts.
If it's accessible to individuals as subscribers, not just like, you know, a data center or something like that, we include it.
Okay.
And part of the reason is that usually a lot of the bills require that the community solar is in the same distribution grid as the subscribers.
Right.
So that counts, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like it's out in the Great Plains or something like that.
So I know that a fundamental belief for you is we can't decarbonize without distributed solar. How does a lack then of distributed solar get us stuck?
There's a lot of different ways. So first of all, there's all this really exciting work on the engineering side about dynamic grid, virtual power plant, demand response. The more we can do that, the more we can lower the costs to everyone because we can shave the peaks and fill up the troughs and use the energy where it's needed, right? So it's a big solution to transmission constraints and not building gold-plated, overpriced systems, which I think is also essential for the politics of the transition. And so my view is that if people aren't benefiting from the clean energy transition, they will not support it.
Yeah.
It's just, we actually live in a democracy. It may be a fucked up, not well-working democracy, but that's where we live.
Right.
So if people can reduce their bills, or if they know someone who has a job in their community, not out on the Great Plains and the big utility scale West Texas thing, right? So jobs in their community, lowering their bills, local benefits, or their, you know, soup kitchen has solar and they, you know, whatever it is, if it's tangible, visible benefits in the community, you can build a political movement that will take us through what's going to be a really tough next 10 years, I think.
Why?
It's expensive. It's complicated. It's hard work. We're not there yet. Like, we've been growing and growing and growing steadily, but everyone says we're not at the right angle yet. Like, we're not growing fast enough yet for where we need to be. So, And there's a lot of backlash, especially on the cost and siting. It's another issue we work on a lot.
Well, coincidentally, the backlash on the cost is exactly what you guys address, because the largest single cost adder is the sales commission, lo and behold.
Of solar, but the issue is the cost of electricity.
Sure.
So what the utilities are basically doing is taking 20 years of deferred maintenance that now they have to do because they're burning down states and they're being forced to finally deal with it, and they've just let the whole thing fall apart instead of doing good. They're taking all those costs, dumping them into the rate base. Rates are skyrocketing and they're blaming it on clean energy.
Yep. And you see this in Florida, you see it in Nevada, you see it all over California.
And it's a unified messaging as well, right? So they are engineering a backlash against clean energy to slow it down. It's not that I don't think utilities think we won't get there.
Right.
They just want to own it all and benefit it they want to own it all and they get the profit.
I love that. This is actually for those who are actually tracking, this is a long answer to the same question, how we can't decarbonize out distributed, because central plants are practically by definition owned, operated, in some way run, controlled for sure in terms of pricing by the utilities. Large IPPs build these facilities on behalf of their customer, the utility. The utility receives the electricity and does with it what they want. It only directly benefits the consumer in that grid or any other if the utility in some way decides to reduce their avoided costs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If they say, oh, wow, like your communities where the installers agree that you've lowered the cost of acquisition, they're going to lower the cost to the homeowner.
Right.
Utilities aren't doing that. They're buying at lower prices, at record low prices, historically low prices, 4, 5, 6 cents a kilowatt hour below what they were paying 10 years ago for coal.
And the costs are skyrocketing.
And prices are going up.
Up quickly. And the third reason for distributed is resiliency, where there's so much more stress with superstorms and tornadoes and hurricanes, fires. And so we've been doing a lot of interesting work, for example, in Houston, where we're working with local community-based organization to do solar plus storage in neighborhoods where the homeowner that gets that or the church that gets that, same in Puerto Rico, agrees to be a resilience hub when the grid goes down.
Yeah.
So there's a distributed grid with storage throughout as opposed to, one line goes down in Puerto Rico and the whole thing crashes.
Yeah.
Right? We're working with a group to build a microgrid in Puerto Rico too, which is really fun.
Along that line, what are some of the innovations that you would attribute to the work that you all are doing through Sun? So you mentioned consumer help desk.
Yeah.
You mentioned being involved in and expanding now into microgrids and virtual power plant programs. Talk about the million homeowners.
We now represent nearly 1 million solar owners.
Yeah? In what way?
They are on our mailing list and they engage with us.
That must be the largest mailing list of any nonprofit in the solar sector. I don't
in
think
solar, probably.
Yeah, I don't think SIA has 1 million homeowners, the email list.
I don't know. I mean, because their focus is industry. Our mailing list of
amazing.
Solar companies is, I think, 750 solar companies.
Okay. That's a remarkably small number compared to what I would expect.
Yeah, because it's mostly...
Are they qualified? Like these are 750?
No, anybody. But first of all, that number could be wrong. I didn't look it up before we met. But
sure.
That's mostly from the 10 states where we have...
Got it. Okay.
Where we're running programs.
Okay.
The million is nationally.
Yep. 1 million national homeowners who have agreed to allow you to contact them for what?
To know what's happening with solar, to get education on solar. We do webinar every month, how to lobby from your couch, what is the cost shift myth, all that kind of thing.
That's super cool.
So we're training people, we're engaging them, and then we're engaging them in advocacy. And it's both in person and digital. So they'll be national. We worked really hard on the IRA with our list. Well, we also turned out farmers who had gotten the REAP program to meet with Manchin in person in West Virginia, right? So in person as well as digital. So the big solar companies have an agreement with us. Their customers, once their customers go solar, they come to us, we onboard them. We're like, congratulations, you went solar. Welcome to Solar United Neighbours.
So like Sunrun, Sonova, like the big dealers are all partnered with you. And how about that? Because that was the other question I had is how in the world do you build a 1 million person email list? As a marketer, I know how hard that is.
Yeah, we tried doing it.
The grassroots way.
Grassroots or the paid,
What do you have to exchange?
Freedom Forever. I think we're working with, they're not quite on yet, but Good Leap and SunPower.
Fantastic.
And then Sonova and Sunrun
they were the key.
Yeah, the key.
What's the exchange for
month.
them? Like, what do they get out of it?
So they have to trust us.
Of course.
Right? We get zero money from them. We do not have them on our board. They do not get to tell us what to do. But we have a really well-established track record of advocating for the solar market, for the distributed solar market. We do it from a different perspective. We're doing it from the perspective of what is good for homeowners or solar owners, subscribers, not what's good for the industry. But we cannot succeed if the industry doesn't thrive. We want a great, big, competitive, robust, well-run industry. Yeah. And they know that we're fundamentally aligned. We've never had an issue where we were advocating for a position and the industry is like, wait, what are you doing? Yeah. So it's more capacity. Like they want us doing it more in more states. Now that we're at this size, we're getting calls from local solar advocates in Idaho or all Utah, anywhere in the world, in the country. But also the SIA chapters in all those states, Hawaii, they know they can call us and in a day we can get an action alert up and to our list about something that's happening in their state. Maybe a day's too short, but 2 days we can do it. So it's, I think, a really honest, robust relationship. We're also, Mosaic, the finance company, gives us their customers. So there's some overlap, obviously. But it's a trust relationship. And we also have to be really careful because we're getting this big benefit from the big ones. We always have to make it really clear that we don't favor the big companies over all the little ones. Mm-hmm. We really want fairness. And I think that's what everybody wants. Yeah. Fairness, transparency. So,
Anya, if folks are so inclined, how is the best way they can reach out to you or learn more about Solar United Neighbours?
solarunitedneighbors.org is the website. I'm Anya at solarunitedneighbors.org. Mm-hmm. It's the best way to reach me.
If you could leave every person that you meet with one thing, what would it be?
I have no idea. That's a really hard question.
That's fine. We can skip that one.
I think we can do it. I think there's just a lot of pessimism out there and a lot of anguish about climate, about the industry, about how gnarly and nasty the utilities are. But I think in the end, we're going to get there. And I think that projecting hope is actually the most important thing we could do. Yeah. Because people become complacent and disempowered when they lose hope. Yeah. And I think that's the special sauce that solar has that nothing else in the climate area is that people get it. They understand it. I was just talking to someone, a funder who's trying to fund electrification work, like heat pumps. And I was like, look, I had to tell you that solar's the gateway drug. Right. People love solar. They get it. They understand it. They want it. And the rest comes later when they become informed, prosumers or whatever. They become generators. I
love that term, informed prosumers.
Then they know how many kilowatt hours they're using. And then they're starting to look at, well, what else can I do? And add my EV. I can still afford it, And so I think people need to understand that you got to start with solar. That's just, I'm not saying it's rational. It's not how an engineer would do it. It's how people do it. It's how people think. When we went solar, my husband, my teenage kids started turning off the lights after we got solar. Why? They're like, I don't want to waste my energy. People are not rational. People are connected to real things. And solar has a really important role for that.
Anya Schoolman is the executive director and co-founder of Solar United Neighbors. I hope that you've been inspired by this conversation. Anya, thank you for taking the time to unravel the beautiful tapestry that is Solar United Neighbors. Help us understand kind of how it was woven, what came in, what went into the work, and continues to. You continue to labor, and that labor is not in vain. Thank you for being a catalyst for solar across the country.
Thank you. Thanks for being interested in the complexity, because lots of times people just want it to be much simpler than it is.
Yeah, it is. It is not simple, and navigating this industry is not simple. Thank you for sitting through an entire conversation here. If you are looking for more ways to tap into the clean energy revolution, we've got more than 700 episodes in our back catalog. You can find that at mysuncast.com. I'm Nico, your host. Our wonderful sponsors help support this show so that you can pay the only thing that we ask you for, which is attention. I appreciate that you've given us that up till now. If you'll check out all the things that our sponsors have to offer, I promise you will find reward in there. And remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.